So, I would suggest that what is needed is ecology and ethics coming together for the first time on a scale that's needed. We have the scale for technology, for solar and wind, and so we need the scale for the moral revolution that's ahead of us. We need an ecological ethics that is up to the task of our moment. We have ethics for suicide, for homicide, even genocide. We do not have ethics for biocide or ecocide. And that is what is at stake. Are we going to live on a dying planet? Are we going to be caretakers for compromised ecosystems? Or are we going to stand up for life? And where, I ask, from the bottom of my heart, working on these issues for decades, where are the religious communities standing up for life? And that's why this moment is so important here on the Cape. So what will this require? I almost don't have to say anything more because you got the message. You really did. Because every change in this country happens with a moral change. Every social change has a moral transformation behind it, and that's what's on the horizon here. That's the Great Awakening, that this is the largest moral, ethical challenge, not only of our times, but of all of human history. And we have to see it on that scale. I want to give the example because many of you are 60s people like me. I went to college in Washington, D.C., where Nancy Pelosi was the Women's Part of Georgetown. We were all involved in civil rights, the anti-Vietnam War. How many of you remember those days? Many of you, exactly. And you know, we grew up, didn't we, in an apartheid country, and I use that word carefully. It was argued that segregation, separate but equal, was okay in schools, in restaurants, in swimming pools, on buses. It was fine until the moral force, this arc of the moral universe, came bursting forth from Martin Luther King, from clergy and lay all across the country, Abraham Heschel, this Jewish and Christian movement that marched and marched and marched. And if you see the pictures of young people sitting at the Woolworth counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, being beaten for wanting to get something to eat and drink. It was a non-violent movement. Unbelievable what they put into that. So, what we need to think about is why was it the Quakers stopped slavery? Abolition was considered morally profitable. We have the same arguments now. It's morally profitable to have fossil fuels. Well, it isn't anymore, because the solar and wind, the powers of the earth, solar, wind, air, fire, geothermal, these are earth powers that we are drawing into our societies in a new way. Clean energy, that is the way forward. So, our challenge then is we need these powerful moral voices from the churches on this issue: climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution. We can say pragmatically, the well-being of people and the planet depend on this. We can say we can't have healthy people on a sick planet. How many of you have cancer in your families, your extended families, your friends? Everyone in this room. That wasn't true when we grew up 40, 50, 60 years ago. We are polluting ourselves and saying, the war on cancer. No, it's the peace with the earth. There will be no peace unless we have peace with the earth and understand the complexity of these ecosystems that Dan just spoke about, the complexity and beauty of what you have on the Cape. You should be standing up for the seas, for these beautiful inland ponds, for the incredible vegetation, the shrubs, the birds. Mary Oliver, one of our great national treasures here on the Cape, that is a new ethics. And she was a spokesperson who led people across the country. We should have her honored again and again. So, let's raise the bar. If we moved from segregation to integration through the civil rights movement, and we're still doing it, it's imperfect, it's not yet done, we understand that, and we can't lose hope. So it's from abolition to civil rights to our present moment, and at every stage inspired by a moral force larger than us. Amazing grace comes from a place larger than any one of us. And how much music drove the civil rights movement. We need music. We need the arts to inspire us. So we can move, I think, and I know you would agree, from segregation of humans from the earth to integration into an inspiring understanding of our profound dependence on nature for water, air, soil, and food. Environmentalism? It's life. Do you want to eat? Do you want to drink water? Do you want to have this for your children? This is life. The acknowledgement with great humility, we do not control or even manage these ecosystems. We are dependent on them, and when we acknowledge our interdependence with them and with all species, we will have a new ecological reformation that will take part across this land. So, this ecological reformation, we already have a declaration of interdependence, and that is the Earth Charter that came out of the Earth Summit in '92. I was part of the drafting committee for 10 years. Look at it. It says in the very beginning, we are part of a vast, evolving universe. Earth, our home, is alive with a myriad community of life. Evolution, ecology, and the rest is up to us to defend, protect, and understand it. So, widening our concerns then from not simply human-divine relations or even human-human relations which are imperfect, but to human-nature relations that are mutually enhancing. Let me make just a few points to conclude. How do we get there? How do we embody an ecological reformation? I think there's more answers in this room than we might imagine. The collective knowledge and hearts are already here. But I would say, first, the scientists are reaching out to religious communities. Phil and others, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, is training scientists to speak in ways that reach a larger public and to say that is your moral obligation. That's new. Ecological Society of America has panels on religion and ecology now. That's new. We are being asked into partnership with science. Secondly, and hopefully we'll hear it from Julian, politicians are outlining a Green New Deal, bringing social justice and environmental justice together. We have to do this together. Equity is at the heart of these issues. Economically, I was just at a conference at Princeton for their 25th anniversary of their institute. Definitely business is on board. It's astounding. We have huge programs at our schools, the environment, on business and the environment. Financing green energy. I've been at many meetings in New York with Citibank and so on. They are working to make this scalable. Alternative and green and clean energy. Technology. As I say, we have it. It's going to be argued about, yes, but we have the technology. It's at scale. I've just come back from 2 weeks in China. Believe me, they are eating our lunch on green energy, solar, wind, etc. Are we the innovators? Are we the creative force? We better get going, because they overtook us in 2015. So, and finally, universities, fortunately, are concerned with this. They're including science and policy, economics and technology, but the moral issue is now at the center. And that's true at Yale, at Harvard, at Columbia, but at many, many other places. So, final examples of this. So I'm not just flying up here. United Nations Environment Program is working with our Forum on Religion and Ecology. We've been working with them since 1987, but there's an opening there to say that the website we have at Yale and their website, the science that they have, and the values of all the world's religion will be integrated. That is a shift. That is an amazing shift. The Pope did an encyclical, Laudato Si, care for our common home. The last 3 weeks in the Vatican, a conference on the Amazon with indigenous peoples being listened to as protectors of the Amazon, unheard of, a major, major shift. And finally, the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative that comes out of Norway, where the Norwegians spent over 12 years, $4 billion on trying to protect rainforests. They said we can't do it without indigenous peoples and religious communities. And so now there's a new initiative. You can check it out. UN Environment, the Norwegian government, rainforest NGOs, and religious communities. This is happening. This is real. This is part of the ecological reformation. I invite you to join in, and thank you so much for listening.
But I just want to make a couple of observations, because Mary Evelyn and I, before we started, said, how do we actually be hopeful and positive and a call to action, instead of the way we're feeling. A lot of us get up in the morning and it's like, oh my God, this is overwhelming. And a couple of facts I just want to throw out there. We are 5% of the world's population in this country, using about 40% of the world's resources. If that's not a moral imperative, I don't know what is. Because as the wealthiest nation, one would argue also that we will bear the impacts of climate change after and less than a lot of the developing or underdeveloped world. Something really that needs to be considered. And the other thing is, and we're going to get into a little bit with Julian and the rest of the panel this afternoon, I would ask us all to consider if we can actually do this without looking at it as an economic challenge as well. We need to transition from an economy that has been extractive and consumptive, building incredible things and doing incredible things. But the basis of our economic system, but since the Industrial Revolution, has been extractive and consumptive. And we have to really be focused also on transforming the economy. And where that's tough when you get into spiritual and interfaith discussions is those are conversations that are not often had in a comfortable way in a place of worship. We don't get into those issues. But I fear that unless we start to have them, the forces of status quo, which are very comfortable right now, we need to be speaking truth to the forces of status quo on this issue. And that very often is an economic discussion as well as an environmental, spiritual, and moral discussion. So that having been said, do we have questions that we've picked up? As those are coming to the front, Phil and Mary Evelyn, I wonder if you could just speak for a minute about what you heard from the other during their comments. And Phil, I know it's a little bit taboo for science to jump in with both feet into the moral imperative and the fierce urgency of now, but I would ask that you take a shot.
Sure, happy to do that. And, you know, so much of what you said.
Can I ask you, do you want the speakers to stand up? Because yeah, I hate to do that. Don't fall off the podium, but I think
So much of what you said, Mary Evelyn, resonated with me. And, you know, as you were starting to speak, I was thinking of a guy I work with who makes the analogy between slavery and continued use of fossil fuels. And then, just as I was thinking it, it came out of your mouth. And I think it is an apt, it is an apt analogy. And you also said so many things about the foundations of our prosperity and our economies being based on natural systems. And a lot of the work, of course, that we actually do at Woods Hole Research Center is all about that. And I think that's a huge deal. And I think if folks understood that better, that prosperity is based on functioning natural systems. I mean, we're so good at providing things like clean water that I think folks forget that those things just don't happen. You just don't, you don't just turn on the tap and it's there. It has to have functioning natural systems to produce that clean water in the first place, and also a lot of smart people to make sure that it gets to your tap. And you also talked about the non-participation of the United States, or the soon-to-be non-participation of the United States in the United Nations climate process, and just to me, what a horrifying embarrassment. Well, firstly, an embarrassment, right? That 195 countries in the world are signed up to this, and we're not. What happened to American exceptionalism and American leadership? We should be setting the example. We should be leaders, and we should be leaders not only in calling for action, but in producing the solutions. And there are, in fact, economic opportunities to be had. And about a year and a half ago, I testified in the House Science Committee hearing on the role of technology in climate change. At least that was what the hearing was supposed to be about. And the reality was it was another ridiculous piece of political theater where Republican members of Congress tried to convince the TV audience that there's no such thing as climate change. And what I basically said is, look, instead of having this conversation, which is silly, we should be having a conversation about solutions. And what you all should be doing as leaders is helping American businesses to develop those solutions and sell them to the rest of the world. And if you don't do it, somebody else is going to do it, and that's probably going to be China. And you're missing an opportunity. So I got off on a rant there, but I'll...
Well, I actually want to keep off the political button in a way, because it's very easy to push that. But I think we've got to push ourselves even beyond that. As important as it is. And in this way, I want to pick up on one of your most important points. And that is, we can't, while business is critical, and it is making progress, but you said, and I agree, we cannot fully value these ecosystems as services to humanity. In other words, the extraordinary biodiversity in the forests of the Amazon, we can't just say, well, it's because there's going to be medicine there or something that's going to save us and so on. No, there's intrinsic value laden throughout the natural world. We can't fully price water. That's part of our problem too. And Carl Safina just did an amazing op-ed piece to this point, saying we've got to have a sense of ethics and even a sense of the sacred. Thomas Berry wrote a book called The Sacred Universe. Please read it. We've got to reclaim this language. It's not just business that's going to move us forward. It's the soul of humans and the soul of the earth, as Brian said.
I'm going to rapid fire. Do you want to
Well,
respond to that?
want to, yeah, your point about the Amazon is a great one, and you know, it does actually tie back a little bit to the slavery analogy in the sense that you probably know, well, the Amazon is tremendously important for not only the climate and the functioning of the local ecosystems, but it's been very important for global climate. There's an enormous amount of carbon in that forest. It's multiple years worth of, equivalent to multiple years of human greenhouse gas emissions is in that forest, okay? And I told you at the outset that to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, which we probably need to do, we have about sort of 10 years of continued emissions at the present rate, okay? And a good fraction of that is tied up in the Amazon forest, to give you a sense of the importance of that. And so that is an international resource, and as you know, Bolsonaro is pushing back on international efforts to preserve the Amazon on the grounds that, you know, this is our resource, and, you know, the outside folks shouldn't interfere in the with our management of this resource. And it reminds me of similar statements about when countries try to intervene to protect human rights in other nations.
Okay, I'm gonna rapid fire some questions then. Question for you guys: what about religious communities that resist the concept of climate change? Mary Evelyn, do you want to take a shot at that? That's a tough one.
It is a tough one, but you know, the evangelical, we did conferences at Harvard for 3 years in the 1990s on all the world's religions and their environmental views and their ethics. And even at that time, there's the Evangelical Environmental Network. They are working on these issues. Catherine Hayhoe is one of the great science spokespersons for it. The younger generation of the evangelicals are far ahead of the older ones. I'm not trying to diminish the significance of it, but it's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take effort within that community. Someone's making a terrific film on how evangelicals have changed. A mother whose house flooded, and she said, "Oh my gosh, this is real." And he's documenting these cases, which would be fantastic. And they need some money for the film.
Do you have anything to add, or you want me to ask another question? I got one for you. Two greatest threats to climate change here on Cape Cod. What are our biggest threats here locally? On Cape Cod.
Effects of... Oh, okay, two great, I'm sorry, my hearing is bad. Two greatest threats, well, I think sea level rise is one. No big surprise there. And another, which is related, is hurricanes and tropical cyclones. And we've done work recently in collaboration with a guy at MIT, Kerry Emanuel, who's really the world's expert on climate change and hurricanes. And what the models show, and there's no reason to doubt it, is more powerful hurricanes, well, everywhere in the North Atlantic, and in particular, including crossing Cape Cod. And that means storm surge, that means extreme wind and extreme precipitation. And actually lately, I'll just riff on that a little bit. I mean, lately one of the revelations of, I think you've seen it in the recent hurricanes, has been the tremendous consequences of the extreme precipitation. And we categorize hurricanes as category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 based on maximum wind speed, but often most of the damage actually is from water, from flooding. And climate change affects that very, very directly. It affects that because maximum precipitation rates are higher, because the atmosphere is warmer. It affects that because storm surge is greater, the pushing in of water from the ocean, and that's greater because of the higher wind speeds, and it's greater because the sea level is higher to begin with. And another phenomenon which I think is, okay, I know, I'll shut up in a second, but scientists got to talk about science. But another this is a final point, another point about hurricanes, which we've seen recently in several of these storms, is the very, very slow forward propagation speeds. And that is a predicted consequence of climate change and the stalling of the hurricanes. And that results in a lot of precipitation accumulation because the storms just sit there and park and dump.
So, Dr. Tucker, you talked a little bit about China and how they may be overtaking us as far as their approach to this. Could you speak a little bit more on that?
Sorry, Phil. I'm actually really curious about these questions. Well, China is taking over the solar industry, all of these alternative energies and so on. So is Germany. But, I've been going to China since '85. My field is Confucianism and East Asian studies, and it's why we started these conferences on religion and ecology, knowing as China and India modernized, more than 2 billion people wanting lights, flush toilets, and so on, that the planet would change, and that's exactly what's happening. And it's not actually factored well into our environmental thinking, but our tar sands oils, most of our resources are going to China. So I would say, and I'll say it briefly here, because China is trying to move towards what they're actually calling ecological civilization. Xi Jinping is speaking about this. It's a commitment in their constitution. They're using Confucian values to get there. Their universities are fed up with Marxism and want the same things, a sustainable future. They don't want Beijing to be filled constantly with pollution and so on. So they are making changes.
And I'm going to ask one last question, then we're going to take a break, and this is a good one. What is the common morality on which your premises are based? That's actually a great question. What is the common interfaith spiritual basis of the morality? What are we actually talking about?
Love of life. It's Albert Schweitzer's, sensibility. It's also Einstein's sense that we live in the midst of unbelievable mystery. We should be in awe every day, and that is something all humans can share, but it has to be matched with a sense of education and knowledge and also justice. So I would say awe, wonder, beauty that science can give us, poetry can give us, and a sense of equity and concern for future generations.
So to wrap up, I will just say this, that I did take another quote from the great Reverend Martin Luther King when I said the fierce urgency of now. That actually is out of the I Have a Dream speech, which in my opinion is one of the greatest pieces of oratory ever given in the English language. But there is a fierce urgency of now. And Heidi and I became grandparents for the first time a few weeks ago. So we are now grandparents. And I think that joy of life, that ability to experience, is that intergenerational handshake that you spoke about. And most of the people in here, many are already grandparents. We want future generations to be able to experience the love of this place and the love of each other that we all have. I want to thank Mary Evelyn. I want to thank Phil for an incredible, this could have gone all afternoon, but for an incredible
We're going to start right back